There appears to be an error, sir. We must you must relocate to make room for our VIP. Jessica, a traveler and flight attendant, expressed in a patronizing
Spiego.
tone, in spite of the courteously stating that this seat is reserved for just our platinum members, you are not welcome and are unable to sit. Karen Wakefield was standing behind her, and a stylishly attired white woman, tapping her eyes impatiently, watched her beautiful watch. Moved quickly between Marcus, the black man in the seat. He was seated in 2A, which she obviously thought of her legitimate. I always sit there because it's almost my seat, she whispered. Loud enough for passengers in the vicinity to Marcus searched for confusion crossing. He did everything correctly according to his face. Reserved in advance, paid in full, and arrived on. He wasn't a platinum member at the time. In a way, having him in the seat was being presented as an issue that required Marcus carefully grasped for his solution. Wallet and showed his platinum member. I'm a platinum member, he said, equally, and this is what I was given. Seat. The flight attendant grinned. A glimmer of surprise crossed as it tightened. Her face was immediately replaced by determination, sir. I get it. But this usually, a specific seat is reserved. Karen is recommended for a better customer. Whitfield, our consistent platinum member, who is flying with us? The implication was often obvious. Whatever his position, Marcus didn't appropriate. In that seat, travelers started to observe how phones gradually appeared. The flight crew began to whisper, didn't realize that this straightforward act of discrimination would transform everything. Not only for them, but in the coming hours, but for the whole airline. As a result of they undervalued the person who held there. This is the greatest story about fate in his hands instance where karma shows up with a have you purchased a first class ticket of your own? Have experienced unjust treatment, just due of the way you dropped your experiences in the remarks below, and if you oppose, injustice and prejudice are being served. Click the subscribe button now and enter justice. As well as your point of view, Marcus wasn't in the comment section. Simply any traveler. But at 42, he was the founder of Right Tech Solutions and its CEO, a dull AI startup worth 2.8 billion, focusing on customer service technology, his software-aided businesses. Recognize and get rid of bias in their ironic customer encounters, taking into account what was about to happen, but the history of Marcus started long before his achievement while growing up in South Chicago, learned to code on his own at the age of 11. Outdated on a used computer, but other Marcus designed electronic games for kids to play them, developing basic programs that ultimately developed into complicated algorithms. His journey wasn't straightforward when Marcus's father was slain when he was 16. An assault that rocked his community gathered at the grave of his father. Young Marcus pledged that would describe his life and draw attention to each other as human beings who make promises first fueled 20 years of tireless labor. Establishing his business in a little apartment, Marcus spends 18 hours a day coding, while taking on odd jobs to help pay the rent in advance. That day, at the security cameras of the airport, Marcus was seen assisting an elderly woman, patiently fumbling with her luggage, helping her locate the gate he held. Thank you to everyone who opened doors for strangers, service providers, name and gratuity at the airport cafe, kindly, not because someone was observing him, but because Marcus Richardson was modest because of this. In spite of his achievements, despite his strength, he was now kind. Making the journey to give the keynote speech at the International Ethics and Technology meeting as Marcus became comfortable with he had a seat in first class, chosen especially because of its legroom. So during the flight, he selected he could work to take a flight on Skylux Airlines since it was the height of opulent air travel. If tickets for first class are more expensive than the monthly rent for some people's platinum, Mers enjoyed the hot towels, champagne service, and seats that sank into spacious beds. But behind this glossy appearance, Skylux was in dire need of attempting to update their reservation systems, were out of date, their rankings for customer service had fallen, and they anxiously seeking a collaboration with a significant tech business to transform their operations. They required this agreement. Terrible thing that the Skylux crew failed to understand that occupying seat 2A was the CEO of the business they had hoped would help them. Jessica, the flight attendant, Miller had spent 8 years with Skylux. Years she took great satisfaction in being aware of the typical first class preferences. Travelers, she consistently ensured Karen Wickfield was assigned to her favorite seat, 2A. One that Marcus Jessica presently occupies had expenses to cover, and was aware that Karen's, her mortgage, was made possible by kind tips. We have a platinum member every month, sir. Who occupies this specific seat every time? Jessica leaned down to speak to Marcus. Do you mind switching to a different class? Although she was courteous, her tone held an undercurrent of anticipation of the type that believed adherence was the only Marcus searched up an appropriate response. Briefly perplexed by his tablet, he grabbed his boarding pass and presented it. I apologize to Jessica, but this is my allotted seat. And he calmly explained, I'm additionally a platinum Karen Whitfield, a participant, stood in the aisle without trying to conceal her. It was obvious that other passengers were annoyed. Hear her say, I always sit. Along this road, it's essentially my seat. Things were rapidly turning into a number of passengers were uneasy. Observing the exchange currently, Jessica moved her weight from one foot to the other. To another, anxiously gazing between Karen and Marcus, sir, maybe you'd be more at ease in a different area. Jessica made her suggestion apparent. She wasn't going to give him another chance. Marcus, the class seat, stayed calm. No, thank you, he said firmly. I have chosen this seat especially for the space for my legs, because I have to work during the Jessica's smile tightened as she flew curtly bowed and proceeded to the in front of the cabin, where she looked back from time to time at Marcus's next move was to covertly captured on video by a traveler on the other. Karen moved ahead in the aisle. Apparently she placed her suitcase in an overhead. As she entered the compartment, she slipped a folded note stack into Jessica's pocket. That has been used as the discretion. I'm grateful for your assistance. With Karen muttered, this scenario simply loud enough for the passengers in the vicinity to hear the flush on Jessica's face as he took the money at that very moment. A straightforward seating disagreement turned into something much darker. An inducement to treat a passenger unfairly because on manifestation of the mood in the initial, Trevor was moved to the class cabin. Marcus's seat was approached by the supervisor with the self-assured walk of an individual acclimated to his power. His stance was unquestionably stiff. Face fixated on what he probably thought was professionalism, sir. You must relocate. To make room for Trevor, our VIP traveler declared loudly enough for anyone in the vicinity. His tone was audible to the passengers, evident that this was a request rather than a... Marcus looked up from his tablet, commanding. Once more his face was composed, but his eyes demonstrating a tired acquaintance with such interactions. I've presented my boarding pass. And platinum status, Marcus responded. This is mine signed seat, Trevor's evenly. A muscle twitched close to the face as it tightened. His jaw as he slightly leaned in. His voice adopting a patronizing tone that caused a number of passengers in the vicinity change uneasily in their seats. Perhaps you don't know how this airline is operating smoothly, Trevor said, highlighting every word as though addressing a youngster is one of the deserving clients we serve. They possess particular preferences by this point. The altercation had attracted the interest of almost all of the passengers in the first-class cabin across the aisle. A businesswoman carefully tilted his phone in the direction of the openly documenting the exchange. Increasing circumstances within a few hours of this witz would be seen by millions of individuals. Karen continued to stand in. She held her fancy handbag down the aisle. Impatience against her chest growing more dramatic, she looked at her watch wildly before. with a sigh of exaggeration that reverberated around the cabin. "I own an crucial meeting. As soon as you land," she told no one in particular that I need my regular seat, but this is more than the other passengers' absurdity. Expressions conveyed your true narrative. Ought to leave the position, but he doesn't even appear to be financially stable. Regardless, one of them said, "Traveler." Encouraged by Karen's slim performance, his voice trailed off as he approached Marcus. To a low murmur, yet amid the strained silence of the cabin, his remarks remained audible to anyone in the vicinity. "Sir, this is the simple method, or we can create this challenging decision." The threat lingered. The moment in the air dragged on for seconds. When travelers waited with their breath held, many people might be surprised by Marcus's response. "Have now given in to the pressure." In conflict, in public, the implicit danger and the wish to stay away from it, raising the stakes, but Marcus Richardson wasn't. Most of the time, he remained calm as he stared Trevor in the eyes. He said resolutely, "This is my 6 short words that are spoken without aggression or rage, but with total." Without a doubt, Trevor's cheeks turned red. Wasn't proceeding as planned. His uniform tie was fixed and straightened, and walked quickly without saying anything else. He chose the front of the cabin. He's back to the service phone. Travelers, but his irritated body language were apparent to every line that had been drew. What ought to have been a standard flight was going to develop into something none of the individuals concerned would ever ignore how tense the cabin was. Evident as Trevor spoke frantically into the passengers on the service phone, traded looks at several people typing frantically on their calls. Others who are observing with undisguised Marcus's curiosity had returned to examining his presentation. His composed "nothing is visible from the outside." He must have been thinking about 5. The cockpit door was a few minutes away. Captain James Reynolds appeared when it was opened. His aged face was set in a polished mask while he trailed Trevor along. Manda Jessica followed them down the aisle. Clearly uneasy with the worsening circumstances, the captain seems to indicate to all that this was no longer just a seating arrangement. Contest, this was now a formal. Captain Reynolds intervened and prevented next to Marcus's chair, looming over the seated passenger. His voice carried the exercised, the power of a person used to being blindly followed. "Sir, I recognize that there is a circumstance that the captain started off in a forceful but measured tone. My staff has the power to designate chairs as required for comfort." And Marcus, for the convenience of all passengers, glanced up at the trio of airline workers. The dynamic power is now standing over him. 3 standing, 1 seated wasn't subtle. However, Marcus's poise never. "With all due respect," Marcus faltered, Captain said in a firm voice, "I have a verified platinum and seat assignment status. I have chosen this particular seat for the space my legs require to work during. There is no rule on the flight that demands that I vacate my designated seat to a fellow traveler who just favors Trevor's mouth, twisted into what may be characterized as a smirk only. The expression of a person who thought they contained all the cards, "Sir, if you're still Trevor, being uncooperative," interrupted, "have no option but to take you out of the danger felt like a physical threat." Below Marcus's brows went up a little. The initial indication of sincere astonishment he displayed throughout the "Are you threatening to engage in a confrontation?" "Take me away, as I refuse to give up," he asked, in a voice, "seat I paid for." The question hung there, indicating disbelief. Its ramifications are impossible in the air. To disregard any potential explanation, is it possible to remove a passenger who was just taking up his allotted "take a seat" before the captain could answer? Karen's tone pierced the tension. "This is absurd," she cried. Her voice rose sharply. "I'm going to miss the relationship I've never handled this terribly throughout my years of flying." Her complaint's irony wasn't lost on the other travelers, a number of whom looked at each other incredulously. Captain Reynolds might have sensed the situation was getting worse than he had expected to take a more commanding. "This is your last warning, Stance," sternly said. "Take a different seat or we'll give a call." Security. This was the time that Marcus cautiously reached into his jacket pocket and took his phone out of it with slow motions. He opened his. I started recording using our camera app because I want to clearly state what is happening here. Marcus calmly stated, "My phone is recording, though I'm being threatened with removal in this scene from this flight since I'm not going to give up." Another passenger's seat that I was assigned, Trevor's face was twisted. "But who wants that?" He grabbed Marcus's phone angrily. His poise entirely abandoned recordings are not allowed. Snatched his hand perilously near snatching Marcus's belongings. Marcus tucked. His phone was just within reach. Actually, no federal statute exists banning recording on airplanes. Unless it gets in the way of crew tasks, I'm just recording this exchange. For myself, safeguarding the legal knowledge that was discovered. Unexpectedly, Trevor pulled his hand away, however, his face darkened. Additionally, what actions would you have taken would you give up if you were Marcus? The seat or refuse to back down? Let's share your opinions in the comments section and remember to hit the subscribe button. Click now to take advantage of more of these tales. The subsequent sound that reverberated, the hefty object passed through the cabin. 2 airport security officers, footsteps officers getting on the aircraft, their arrival signaled a no-go return. The security guards moved down the aisle. They practiced efficiency. Tracing Trevor's hand gesture, the cabin had been delivered straight to Marcus's seat. Fallen quite quiet, even the aircraft's background noise appeared to have diminished as all emphasis is directed on the conflict. Marcus sat in his maintain a straight posture and a controlled expression. Even if the humiliation is being endured, his phone kept filming while he was there. From the location where he had put it on, the first security guard started, "Lapser. We've been made aware of a situation. Requesting that you leave the plane." Marcus acknowledged the situation and nodded. Presence of the officer while keeping his dignity. "I want to comprehend the particular airline rule that I'm breaking." Asked him to speak in a measured and clear voice. I'm seated in the designated chair with a platinum and a valid boarding pass. Status updates between the security guards. Uncomfortable looks. It was getting more and more. Evidently, they were summoned to remove the traveler who did not break any regulations. "Sir, you must collect your possessions and come with us," said the second officer. Dodging the query, Marcus gazed straight at Captain Reynolds, who was a few feet away. Trevor at his sides. "And am I being sent out for refusing, Jessica?" I offer my appropriately designated seat to Marcus. A different traveler inquired directly. His query piercingly. "Pretend that you're being kicked out for making a fuss." The captain answered with a word that sounded hollow even as he said. A whisper swept through the cabin. And the old man in the second row shook his head in agreement as a young lady in the rear of first class brushed away her tears. Marcus started with quiet dignity in his eyes. After gathering his things, he slid his tablet case into his presentation. Placing notes in his bag before standing Karen, who had been observing the entire scene without making any effort to conceal her smug smirk of triumph. Played at her mouth's corners as she observed Marcus being led away from his seat. Her seat, she felt, is correct. He obviously doesn't belong. Was said by entered the cabin, but he didn't do anything. Any issues, call another traveler. All of this announcement is being recorded by me. Third, although in spite of Marcus's remarks was taken out, he strolled with his head raised back straight and eyes ahead. A man's stance that, having previously experienced injustice, and understood how to keep it in its face, while he went by the row in which Trevor was standing. Overseeing the removal of something occurred that would eventually become a crucial fragment of proof that Karen was thinking about herself. Another folded bill slipped by unseen. Entering Trevor's Thank you for taking care of that pocket. A circumstance? She muttered, her voice only loud enough for multiple people to record. Recording of passengers. First class phones ought to adhere to certain requirements. Her words' meaning lingered in the like a toxic cloud of air as Marcus exited the aircraft accompanied by security. He took his phone out once. His fingers brushed swiftly across the screen when he was writing a text message. Elise, his Sekia OO, took me out of the plane, but they chose the incorrect individual. To embarrassment, but most individuals would be agitated, ashamed, or furious after Marcus had such an encounter, and displayed the controlled poise of it someone who possessed traveled across these waters before to Sarah. So, it's Marcus, please put together the legal team right away, he talked into his phone. His forceful yet low voice said, I've just been taken out of a Skylux aircraft in what seems to be a classic example of discriminatory care given to the security guards who had led him off the aircraft and stayed close to their original conviction. Melting into uncomfortable awareness, the event was being reviewed by one officer. Report his face on his iPad. Becoming more and more distressed as he went over the information, sir. At last the officer stated, coming up to Marcus with hesitation, I think there might have been a misinterpretation, the report suggests. Although you were disturbing others, the lengthy certain witness accounts don't confirm. Marcus put his phone down for a moment. His eyes remained fixed as he spoke. In fact, the officer, there was a miscommunication, he responded, but not on. I was seated in my designated seat using a legitimate boarding pass. At the time, I was requested to relocate to make room for another. When I refused the passenger's request, I was compelled to remove the officer's shift. Looking at his partner uneasily, who had already begun to retreat from the circumstance that they were both aware of, utilized to impose something that had not related to safety or security procedures. We regret the officer promised to be of inconvenience, sir. Every week before, to pursuing his partner in a quickly retreat, Marcus right away resumed recording the incident, sending a thorough voice memo, reciting every exchange and every word, expressed every subtlety of his body, had watched him talk into his phone. A young woman cautiously walked up to, had her carry-on bag in one hand. Marcus's other hand and her phone knew her right away. She had been across the aisle from him. Seated in, she said, First class, excuse me, sir. Voice with a hint of outrage on his, I followed you off the plane on your behalf. Since I was unable to simply sit there and be, I recorded a portion of what was occurring. Everything starting with that flight. When the attendant first came up to you, you were ejected from the aircraft, she held up her phone, displaying the video to Marcus. Crisp, unhindered video that recorded not just the elimination of him, but also when Karen stole money. It was a damning moment. To Trevor, this was obviously discriminatory. The woman's voice remained shaky. You should have a little more feeling. Marcus's face softened as a result of the first time since the beginning of the adventure. He said, Thank you, with sincere appreciation. This might be extremely beneficial. They traded contact information, details the woman said she will give him the entire uncut video right away, and to provide testimony if required, which she did not. What they didn't realize was that millions of people would soon watch the video. Back on the plane, however, a different situation was developing. Whitfield seemed at ease, in Marcus's smug enjoyment in her seat hardly hidden, as Jessica gave a free glass of champagne. I apologize for the inconvenience, Miss Whitfield, Jessica suggested. We would like to make sure the remainder of your journey is ideal among the passengers in the galley. Observe the conversation between Trevor and Jessica, discreetly recognizing Trevor's appearance, tallied Karen's folded bills, slipped him. $200 was the amount they agreed to degrade a man whose only transgression was taking a seat that he was entitled to both A great bonus today, Trevor whispered as he slipped the cash into some passengers can relate to his wallet. How to display appropriate admiration that neither of them understood that they will soon pay a heavy price for this gift. More than they could ever hope to. Imagine that all of a sudden a call came in to the team for a last minute meeting. The one of the airline administrators called, who told them that they had recently made a serious error that might have cost all three of them were afraid of their jobs. As they exchanged glances in an attempt to recognize what was occurring, the mood had changed and they were obviously out of control now. Who was the man they removed exactly? From the first class seat and began the aircraft on the sleek's upper floor, Skylux's glass-walled headquarters. Richard, the CEO of Skylux Airlines. Williams was doing a quarterly evaluation. Projections as his phone rang, accompanied by an internal request from the Public Relations Department. Sir, we might be facing a major circumstances arising, for the PR director's voice had a noticeable hint of there's a video going around that shows one of our travelers being taken out of a Williams side flight this morning. First, passengers who act dismissively are removed for disruptive conduct on a daily basis. Janet, take care of it as usual. Assertion, sir, this is distinct from the PR. The director maintained that the traveler was not, he was a black man who was disruptive at the beginning, class that was unwilling to give up. A white woman's seat in the video demonstrates how our employees take money from the woman, both prior to and following his removal. The Williams' face was drained of blood as he processed the ramifications and forwarded the video now. As Williams observed, the film of his face on his monitor changed from worry to fear, the blatant discrimination against the money changing hands with respectful calm. It was a PR stunt to eliminate the man. Disaster developing in real time. Who has Williams requested that we recognize the traveler? There was a pause before the PR. The director said, "Yes, sir." In accordance with Marcus is the manifest name. Richardson, the subsequent quiet was Marcus Richardson. Did you say that? At last, Williams asked in a barely audible voice. Yes, sir, that name does exist above a whisper. Holds special meaning for you. Williams fell. Returning to his seat and gazing at Marcus Richardson is the ceiling founder of Right Tech Solutions and its CEO, the same business that we have been pursuing a $50 million collaboration in the same way business that has been covertly purchasing our stock during the previous two in a private airport years away. Marcus was seated in the middle of a quickly putting together his crew. Elise, within 20 minutes, Thompson had arrived. Of his text message bringing their chief legal advisor and head of business, there were open phones and communications computers. Were humming and the air was brittle. The video has concentrated energy, reached 2 million views already. The head of communications stated that turning her screen to see the quickly rising figures that major news organizations are selecting, it's up. Marcus and Elise now exchanged an important glance that said years of common experiences and reciprocal realizing that they are unaware that we were already assessing their business. Elise stated that the partnership's culture, her voice conveying the sour sarcasm of, I suppose, they just gave us the situation, their true self, without being aware of it. Who was viewing? At the Skylux corporate office, the media team was dealing with a crisis. Screens showed the quickly escalating discrimination against #Skylux was. The number of video views that are trending nationally had surpassed 5 million, and celebrities were starting to make the tale more. Williams was one of their millions of fans. Now his executive team is all around him. Their faces gleam as they analyze the damage, sir. His helper cut him off. I'll go out to Marcus with my phone in hand, on the line at Richardson's office, so you can ask to talk to him. Williams, the room fell silent instantly, inhaled deeply before agreeing to the call Mr. Richardson on the speakerphone. Started speaking in a strained, forced, I would like to extend our warmest sorry for the unacceptable incident. That took place the CFO was stopped by a morning wait who had been looking through files hurriedly. The tech, Marcus Richardson, CEO Williams, gave a somber nod as the speaker's voice was serene. And, hey, Mr. Williams, thank you for readiness to communicate with me directly since you may already be aware of my business, own almost 25% of Skylux. A controlling interest in an airline is shared when, in addition to our strategic, the executives traded partners, terrified looks at the whole extent of, at last, the scenario dawned on them. Wish to contact the stakeholder in an emergency meeting? Right away, Marcus carried on, with his tone that doesn't allow for conciliation. Today's happenings have expressed grave worries regarding Skylux's corporate culture and dedication to moral treatment of everyone passengers, and a board meeting for emergencies had been called, with extraordinary members of the urgent board had left everything to go to a golf tournament, clothing that others have obviously hurried from family events. The tension in the room was oppressive while they awaited the man's arrival, who now held there when Marcus Richardson had fate in his hands. When it finally arrived, the impact was instantaneous, and the electrifying chatter stopped. Despite this, every head turned in mid-sentence. All that he had gone through that day, Marcus exuded the calmness of assurance of a man who was fully aware of, given who he was and his value. He removed the same suit he had been wearing. From the aircraft, a quiet yet potent reminder of what had happened that day. Elise Thompson, his executive team, two additional individuals whose legal counsel presence would later be essential to the change that was going to start when Marcus sat down. Williams dimmed the lights with a remote control and turned on the enormous screen. The video started in the front of the room. To perform with stunning clarity in its ramifications at every second was caught the first altercation. Trevor's patronizing demeanor, the captain's feeble explanations, and the most damning of them all, or the exchange of funds prior to and following Marcus's disappearance. When the video concluded, the room was quiet for multiple board members for the entire 30 seconds, was unable to keep eye contact with Marcus. Williams cleared his throat. Confront ashen as he turned to speak to Marcus. Mr. Richardson, we would like to convey our sincere regrets for the awful treatment you received. This behavior today does not represent the Skylux Airlines ideals, and I have no interest in apologizing. Marcus cut off his calm, but, considering how direct his remark was, sent a noticeable ripple throughout the space. Members of the board moved uneasily in their leather chairs. They became acutely conscious that typical corporate damage control would not enough. As your biggest person, Marcus, the stockholder, went on, I have one demand and one choice at a time. The employee in question has been fired. As soon as possible, I'm canceling the suggested agreement between my tech business as well as this airline. Williams looked at the board members anxiously prior to answering. Mr. Richardson, as we recognize your frustration, perhaps we should think about suspensions in place of some of these workers have worked for the business for many years, as well as our union agreements. Marcus, this cannot be negotiated, said, flattening his hands on the table. You're responsible, or I'll pull. The $50 million and my investment contract that we were thinking about, implications loomed large in the air at 2%. Unexpectedly liquidated their stock on the loss of the market would be disastrous. The modernization contract, worth $50 million, would cause them to fall behind by years. Rivals as though in the boardroom on cue. The doors of a young financial. The analyst arrived hurriedly, obviously having run from a different. He pushed a tablet toward Williams on the floor. Forgetting all boardroom procedures, manners in his haste. Sir, the news of our stock is already being impacted by the occurrence, he said breathlessly. Price, we're 12% lower, and analysts of the declining market are forecasting a shutting. There might be a 30% drop if we don't act. Decisively, Williams looked Marcus from the tablet and back the truth of his circumstances becoming into it was painfully obvious that this wasn't only about one incident any longer. Instead, it concerned the very airline's ability to survive would fail without Marcus, as everything other investors will withdraw their shares as well if he departs, which will make the very man they are bankrupting, taken from the aircraft, now contain the destiny of the airline in his 3 stories under the boardroom, hands in a clean conference space without luxury Captain Trevor Jessica, and Reynolds sat in awkward quiet. They were called in without justification, despite the increasing whispers. Throughout the businesses, the cause of worry, the HR director arrived right away, 4:30 p.m. Alongside the 2 security personnel and the company's legal counsel officers, who took their positions quietly near the entrance. The existence of security was not considered conventional practice for evaluations of performance or even disciplinary actions meetings. It was an indication of something much more. Sincerely, I will speak with the HR director directly. Started arranging 3 files that were identical on the table where you work for Skylux Airlines has been shut down with effect from right away. The statement struck like a Jessica's hand flew to her, delivering a violent hit. Trevor's face with his mouth shutting off a gasp twisted with outrage. Captain Reynolds just shut his eyes. Suddenly, an aged face appears, decades old. We regret that Trevor was the first, older to get his voice back, rising with every we were simply following the routine. That traveler was acting obstinately and interfering with the boarding interpret. The HR director's statement stayed silent while she opened her laptop and swiveled it in their direction. Trevor's viral video started playing. Condescension was aptly expressed. Jessica's uneasiness was noticeable, the captain's lack of accountability obvious to everyone, but it was what the following event that sapped the color. Trevor's look in the video makes it obvious. Demonstrated Karen sneaking cash into his pocket. Her remarks regarding upholding guidelines that could be heard even when she tried to talk softly while taking money from a passenger to treat an additional passenger process that the director questioned her in a plain tone. Jessica, there was no suitable response. Shed tears that were pouring down her cheeks. She acknowledged that we had made a grave error. I realized that her voice was no more than a whisper. Even as it was taking place, it was incorrect. Captain Reynolds, nevertheless, I didn't stop it. A man who had made his way through actual storms in his career seems incapable to endure this. I was simply relying on my crews. He provided a weekly assessment, but I didn't personally observe the first conflict. You all failed in your duty today, the HR director strongly said. Not only to the business but the passengers' basic human decency. Marcus Richardson, the Chief Executive Officer of Appropriate Tech Solutions, and our biggest individual, the revelation struck the shareholders like Jessica is crying after a second blow. Made Trevor's face more intense earlier. Anger swollen and now exhausted. You will be escorted when you are fully colored. To gather your own items, and the HR director then left. Continuing, your last salary will consist of severance for 2 weeks, which is more than benevolent considering the conditions, because they were LED from the 3 previous workers in the room felt the same emotions Marcos had earlier. On that day, the shame of being escorted away, as others observed, the symmetry was flawless and terrible. In the meantime, in the main Skylock headquarters auditorium, hundreds of workers had come together for this CEO made an unexpected announcement. Stood on stage with Marcus at his sides. Today, Richardson and his group are at Skylux. One of our passengers was let down by an airline in Williams. Started in the most basic manner. His voice rising above the quiet. This setback wasn't merely an isolated event, it was indicative of fundamental problems that need to be resolved right away. And in a thorough manner, he indicated Marcus, someone came forward to describe the route. Forward, each and every Skylux employee, airlines will see widespread discrimination. Training prior to going back into duty, Williams carried on with this training course. WR Tech Solutions creation will become an enduring component of our onboarding and continuing discussions about education circulated around the throng as staff members acknowledge the size of the announcement that was being made in the expense of a company-wide training program, millions, and interfere with operations important iFly. Marcus spoke about the gathered workers immediately to hear his voice bearing the burden of both personal expertise and authority in the field. This goes beyond simply punishing those. He clarified that it's about changing your culture as a whole. Occurred. Today wasn't merely incorrect because since I was a shareholder, it would have been just as incorrect if I were an instructor, physician, or pupil on the road. The worker at home listened silently. Many others nod in agreement, while others gaze slumped in mutual shame over what had carried out at their business's name. Beginning tomorrow, the CEO declared. In the pivotal last second of the SKU Airlines will implement a meeting company-wide training for required training, each flight, each route, and there will be a 48-hour service interruption. Whereas every one of our staff takes part in the initial stage of this program, the gasps could be heard throughout an industry's auditorium where delays of a few minutes cost thousands of dollars. A 48-hour total shutdown was unprecedented. The airline would have to pay. However, the message it conveyed regarding their dedication to change was invaluable. Observing from the stage, Marcus noticed the expressions of the workers who are processing. Others resisted this news. Relief, although the majority showed an increasing acknowledgement that this was a significant change in their business's identification during the weeks after to the Skylux Airlines experienced the most thorough change in its 30 years conference rooms for history around the nation were transformed into training. The flight schedules for the centers were changed to guarantee each worker is free of baggage. Participants included the CEO's personal handlers. In the required program, the instruction wasn't the norm. Corporate checkbox activity that workers had been used to ignoring it was difficult and immersive, and occasionally uneasy workers encountered their own prejudices. Using advanced simulation workouts created by the WRTech's crew of AI and behavioral psychologists, Marcus, a specialist, made sure to personally dealing with a lot of these meetings in front of crowded rooms with skepticism and occasionally defensiveness. Workers, here is your chance to be. He shared with them his portion of the solution, voice bearing the burden of individual experience, what I went through to those who lack my resources or platform each day. And now we start altering the perception that his presence was revolutionary, giving a human face to what the management could have rejected as a public relations disaster for others. Readiness to participate in spite of his treatment showed a dedication to real transformation as opposed to retaliation beyond the corporate cocoon of Sky. The repercussions persisted in reveal. Captain Reynolds and Chef Jessica found that in the era of digital accountability follows you everywhere. Their features and names have turned into equivalent to prejudice in a sector where standing is Trevor sat in his apartment with money. Besieged by emails of rejection from other mentioned the airline's prior experience, but we've made the decision to look at additional applicants. Currently, the courteous corporate, the reality couldn't be concealed by words. The man from that was sought after for employment, going viral. Jessica experienced similar rejections in the video, each one expanding her knowledge of how one choice could change the path of a profession developed over 8 years. In an interview that first appeared encouraging for the hiring manager's expressiveness altered the situation. It became clear that you were the flight. A result of that prejudice incident, did the interview not end? Not long after Captain Reynolds had 30. After years of flying, he discovered incapable of obtaining even entry-level roles inside the industry. His illustrious career had been condensed into the brave moments of poor judgment on Judd's part when he had not Karen, stand up for what was right. Skylock did not spare Whitfield either, had imposed a ban for life, but the repercussions went well beyond her. Favorite airline she sat on at her homeroom while viewing television reports about the discussion of the occurrence. Her name and her actions by national pundits, her business had put her on administrative leave. Until her cases investigated, behavior toward friends had become more distant themselves, hesitant to be connected with the woman's airline brand, now Karen, on social networking sites, for maybe that was the first time she had to face the true effects of her entitlement. But Skylax was putting in the comprehensive policy into practice modifications to the new rules that were set, zero acceptance of strengthened procedures for discrimination, addressing conflicts over seeding and safeguarding for workers who disclosed wrongdoing. The handbook for employees was revised to make it clear that accepting gifts or traveler payments in return for preferential treatment was justification for instant passengers started to notice the termination differences that are very instantly fleeting. Interviews recorded at baggage and gates allegations showed a changing impression. The flight attendant appeared to paying closer attention to everyone. I've seen one previously. As a frequent traveler, it always felt as if there were an unseen hierarchy based on your appearance or identity. I truly experienced an issue with my another passenger's seat assignment. However, their approach to it was fully competent. They discovered a solution that satisfied everyone without diminishing anyone's feelings. Marcus, appreciated as promised, gradually brought back his investment as quantifiable modifications were made and confirmed by autonomous. The stock of auditors, Sky started to rise again. Despite the lengthy journey back, the employment procedures of the organization experienced a total transformation, incorporating diversity actions that went beyond the surface measures to address the core problems of inclusion as well as representation. The change wasn't flawless or instantaneous. Real change never is. Yet every week that goes by, Skyu was becoming into the business it had always stated to be in its ads, in which everyone genuinely was given royal treatment 6 months after. The event that almost brought down Skew, the airline was not only getting through it, was increased passenger volume, had not only recovered but went up by employee satisfaction ratings were at 12%. A record high for the poisonous culture that had rotted inside the surface for the light has been present for years and was the most unexpected thing that was ultimately healing. It happened on a soggy Tuesday. Marcus Richardson made the announcement in the morning, a fresh project via his foundation. The Second Chance program was created especially for those who had lost their jobs as a result of instances of bias. The course provided thorough training for rehabilitation, and a route back accountability for employment doesn't imply a lifelong penalty. Marcus outlined during the press conference. Starting the program entails making money. Your manner. We are unable to create a more equitable society unless we establish pathways for those who have admitted their errors and completed the task to shift. Among the initial participants in the show were Trevor, Jessica, and Captain Reynolds. No one's trip was simple. The program mandated that they face the unpleasant realities of oneself to comprehend the effects of their behavior, not only toward Marcus, but also toward numerous individuals who went through similar therapy without the ability to defend. Returning Trevor, who had been the most resilient, experienced the most deep change during group discussions. He discussed growing up in a home where racism was prevalent on a casual basis, regarding never challenging his prejudices inherited until they were completely costly to him. I never considered myself to be prejudiced, acknowledged during one especially strong session, I reasoned, because I didn't express hatred or use derogatory language. I was among the excellent anyone. This incident has demonstrated to me how, even when we're not biased, it still exists. Acknowledge it in Jessica's journey was centered on us. Moral bravery and the readiness to communicate up, even though I knew it would cost you. She revealed that what was taking place was incorrect. However, I feared losing my work if I challenged the captain or Trevor. And now I realize that my silence caused me to Captain Reynolds, the eldest of the complicit. The three may have had the most difficult journey. Years of thinking he had cured. Everyone was fairly summoned to his behavior. That day made me wonder, believe the incorrect things, since he mirrored me dependable authority over humanity. I'll make that my career's final focus. Correct with the program's certificates. With them, Trevor and Jessica started looking for jobs at entry level. Applications from several airlines now included their narrative, not as a justification, but as background for the development. They had completed the certifications, did not retract their previous behavior, but they showed a dedication to altering that. Some employers discovered Jessica was persuaded to be the first to take a stance that isn't a flight, but as a member of the ground crew at the salary for a regional airline was lower than half of her earnings from Skylux. The work was harder and the hours were longer. Hard on the body, but it was a second. She had previously considered the possibility. Trevor followed a month later, but it was impossible. Beginning with baggage handling at another. Given his age, airline Captain Reynolds and encountered another route. Would never take a commercial flight again, but discovered a reason to educate in the second possibility program, assisting others in comprehending the effects of the types of his choices regarding Skylux itself were changed. Independent auditors verified what travelers had previously observed, that the airline was now the industry leader in client satisfaction throughout all. For the first time, black demographics, Middle Eastern and Hispanic travelers. The stated level of service experience is equivalent to significantly superior to those of white travelers. A metric that ought to have been commonplace but was never accomplished in the sector. During a confidential discussion at Skylux, Marcus was seated across from the CEO at headquarters. Richard Williams evaluating the half-year progress report. You've made significant progress. Marcus agreed to shut the folder, including the most recent metrics that receiving praise. Williams nodded, the weight of the preceding months visible in his face's fresh lines. He acknowledged that this hasn't been simple, but what has occurred to you has been essential. That day made us face problems. We had been oblivious for years, which is frequently how change occurs. Marcus responded, not by comfort, but through conflict. The two guys stood and shook hands, no longer rivals, pleasant companions, but partners in a change that was not simply one airline, but establishing a new norm for a whole industry. Justice isn't always about. Sometimes punishment is a necessary part of progress.